All right, the book of Proverbs, verse 9. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. Hi, everybody. This is a Christian channel called Christian RPG Gamers. It's kind of like a ministry and a community. Yeah, I just talk about like nerdy entertainment stuff. So I guess for this video, I was thinking about making I just made one for the Follow TV show, so I'll just make another one while I'm at it. So this one will be for Cyberpunk. I think it's Cyberpunk 2077. All right, let's take a look here. Let's just take a look at this trailer here.
In 2077, they voted my city the worst place to live in America. Main issues: sky-high rate of violence, and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else. Can't deny it, it's all true. But everybody still wants to live here. The city's always got a promise for you. Might be a lie, an illusion, but it's there, just around the corner, and it keeps you going. It's a city of dreams, and I'm a big dreamer.
Okay, so I guess that like sets the scene a little bit for the series. So my little YouTube channel, I mean, I have a walkthrough on the channel if you're interested in watching it. I mean, if you don't want to, that's fine too. It's out there and it exists. Okay, so I'll try to give some Christian point of view on this. I'll just kind of give a basic review while I'm at it too. So, I mean, to start out with the obvious, Cyberpunk is made by, I think, they're called CD Projekt Red, and they made The Witcher. Obviously, this game is very adult and very mature at times, so, I mean, to be real with somebody, I mean, that's no secret, right? I mean, there is, a lot of sexual references. There is a lot of, there's a tremendous amount of partial nudity in it. It's very suggestive. It's extremely violent at times. There's lots of violence. There's lots of killing. There's lots of death. They swear like a sailor constantly. And there's a lot of really dark, it's just a lot of really mature, harsh, dark, brutal aspects. So that's no secret by any stretch of the imagination. So, I mean, obviously for a person of the faith, those are some potential turnoffs, right? Okay, but there is a lot. I mean, it's very morally gray, and I feel like there is a lot of good things you could talk about for this game too. It has a lot of good moral aspects to it, and it also has a lot of it's kind of like a lot of really crappy moral gray stuff too. And it kind of shows in some aspects the worst of humanity. So. Yeah, this is a very it's very harsh, brutal world. And okay, so Christianity is mentioned and talked about in Cyberpunk. God himself is talked about, and the message of the gospel is referenced in Cyberpunk. I do think that's a net positive and net W. And you playing the main character, you have the ability to decide whether you want to believe in God or not. You can say yes and you can say no. The option is given to you throughout the story. I know, especially during one of the side quests, a little bit more towards later on in the game, you're just point blank asked if you believe in God, yes or no. I think that's a really big net W. Kind of like in Mass Effect, you're asked whether you believe in God or not. And that's a choice. I couldn't tell you the answer. I mean, if you're a Christian, you should say yes, or you should want to say yes if you could. So obviously there's going to be a handful of some spoilers in this video. To be honest, the spoilers aren't going to be super heavy, but there's going to be some spoilers. And I give spoilers, but they're not super deep, right? So what are some things I could mention? Okay, so there's obviously there's one example with the gospel, and Johnny Silverhand, he will tell you about what he believes, and basically he's an anarchist. He basically doesn't believe in God. He's extreme gray to the end. But he also ultimately gets what he deserves. Now he has a chance for some redemption too. But Cyberpunk is a pretty strong series about the idea of redemption. And if you were given another chance, what would you do with your opportunity? And would you squander it and just double down on what your bad life already is, or would you try to find some kind of peace before your end comes? I think that's a pretty strong biblical message in the story. And also this series talks about the value of life. How much does life really matter, and how much does your life as an individual really matter? And how much do you really care about other people? And should you care about other people or not? It's like if people are just going to die very quickly. Most people live very short lives, or if they do live longer, they just become corrupt and they use lots of drugs, or they sell themselves for sex or some other terrible darkness. People die left and right, and no one really cares in this world. It's like, what is really the value of human life? And just how much does your life matter? And how much does your soul really matter? And should you care about your soul, or should you care about your life? Yes or no? I think that's a pretty strong that's a pretty strong question. I don't necessarily know the answer to. But I think the higher road is to choose to believe that life matters, even if your life is pretty short. I think that valuing life, choosing to be pro-life or believing in value of life, I think that's a better road to walk down, to be honest. I mean, I think it's better to believe that things matter than they don't matter. But this game does push it to this game, and then there's also a little anime TV show they made too. Again, it does push things to the limits, and it does ask, it makes you ask some pretty harsh questions of the value of life, and do people matter? Do your choices matter? Does anything matter? Does anyone matter? In holiness, does God and your relationship with God, does that matter? And these are some pretty hard questions. And I think the series does make you ask those questions. And those are not easy questions. Again, it's like you look at Johnny Silverhand. He looks back at the end of his life. He was a terrorist. He was an anarchist. He was just consumed with extreme chaos, very selfish, very narcissistic, very arrogant. Everything was about him. Basically, he hated corporations, and he went out and he basically became extremely cold and dark and just turned his back on everyone he knew and just went out on a massive kamikaze explosion against the corporation. And Johnny Silverhand looks back on his life, because Johnny Silverhand's basically given another opportunity, and he sees his life and he sees that there's nothing there. No one remembers him or cares about him. They knew that they knew that he did a really bad thing a long time ago, and just no one cares. And he looks back and he sees his life, and everything in it was basically just for nothing. And it in a sense, it is very depressing. If it's the truth, and in a life of living a very sinful, evil, wicked, if you live a life that's very self-serving and evil, you're going to look back on your life, and you're going to realize there's just nothing there. It's just empty, and you're just dead inside. And no one cares. Because that's the way of the world. You're useful as long as you serve their purpose, and then as soon as you're done, they just throw you away. Same thing with the corporations, same thing with the families and all these groups. And unless you are honorable, no one cares. And no one's going to remember you. Just going to throw you into like the trash and just going to leave you there. And that's it. And that is very brutal and that's a very harsh reality. But if you live a life of sin and you offer really no value to the world, that's probably just your fate. And the same thing with like Johnny. And Johnny looks back and it's just like, he's just very unhappy. And there's only a handful of people, like, some of his very close friends, who even really remember him in any way, shape, or form. If they're drilled on it and they're pressed on it and they're forced to answer a question or two, they might remember some of the memories about him. But honestly, they're usually pretty negative. And the whole world just doesn't care. And he doesn't care about anyone, and no one cares about him. And again, that's pretty brutal, I admit, right? So Johnny's kind of given a second chance. And he gives you as a player, you have the chance to give him, to let him find a little bit of some personal redemption, so he can find some peace with his life. And I think that's a good thing. Then you as the main character, and in a sense, you're also given a chance for redemption. And it's not really specified whether you really were a good or a bad person, but eventually, you basically, you're doing some criminal actions. You're involved in some shady, dark crap, and you basically come to an ending, right? And instead of dying, you end up having you get another chance, another go around at life, and you can choose to use this opportunity, to do what's good, or you can use this opportunity to do what's evil. And again, you meet with Johnny, and you meet with a handful of these people, and you meet with I'm not going to go too deep into the main story, but you meet with the Japanese leader, and you see all these other people, and you see yourself, and you get to see people's endings and their outcomes of their lives. And it can be brutal. It's a very harsh world, and this game reflects reality. This game reflects the real world. And I think that's why people like moral gray stories, and that's why people like it when it's pretty dark and brutal and harsh, because it reflects reality. And in reality, life is pretty harsh. It's pretty dark and it's pretty brutal. It's real, right? Okay. Verse here. I don't really know if I have a Bible plan made for this, but I know some people want me to put some more Bible verses every once in a while on something. All right, so this is from the book of Matthew. So verse 28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. Verse 30. And even the very hairs in your head are all numbered. 31. So don't be afraid. You are worth far more than sparrows. I guess this verse talks about a person's soul, and and even here, it's so here's another one. Verse 21. A brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents, and have them put to death. Okay. So what are some of these Bible verses, based off of Cyberpunk, hypothetically? I think Cyberpunk shows a lot of the end of the world, and it also shows a lot of the darkness in the world, and it shows how people behave and how they really think and feel. And if the government wasn't going to hold you accountable, people would do bad things to you. Parents and children would betray each other. Your brothers and sisters of the faith would stab each other in the back. You have you have your soul. Here's about Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, well, that's just a hypothetical Bible verse. I don't know. I just kind of scrolled to one a little bit here. One major aspect of Cyberpunk is the soul. It talks about the soul and the hypothetical reality of what a soul is or what a soul isn't, and whether one really exists or not. And should you want to live in this life longer than your time? And it talks about some deep philosophy that's really hard to understand and to accept. Again, I don't necessarily know all the answers myself. I mean, I'm just a mortal man at the end of the day. I know. Okay, so obviously, I don't want to go too deep into the spoiler, but one of the abilities you have to choose in the game is basically you have the ability to basically to I don't want to do the spoiler too heavy though. This is a pretty big spoiler. So basically, you're given the ability to choose whether you would want to just let your story end after a handful of months and just die, or would you want to potentially, remain on this earth for another chance for another hypothetical go around in this life for many more years in a more eternalized version of yourself here. And that's a pretty harsh. It's a pretty difficult thing to grasp. And I don't necessarily know the answers. So for my walkthrough, I decided I was just gonna let my character. He was just gonna die the natural route, rather than have my soul subjugated to becoming some potential AI machine, or it was gonna replicate my soul or whatever. It was some unnatural, perverse way. Why not just go out and naturally, right? So, and the idea of one's soul. And again, it talks a lot about that in Cyberpunk. Okay, so those are some hypothetical Christian aspects that it's pretty deep, but it's also pretty morally gray, and it's subjective. So, what are some other Christian review aspect of Cyberpunk? It's kind of like Grand Theft Auto a little bit, and to be honest, it's also a little bit like Fallout. It has it's in first person. It's like a first person shooter. Maybe it's a little bit like Far Cry, or maybe a little bit like you got some of those kind of series. You got a little bit of some Fallout, maybe some Fallout 3 or 4. You got some and there's a little bit of some you can drive around in a car. They have these little missions you can go on. There's a whole bunch of side stuff. It's just debatable whether all this stuff is really worth it or not. It's not super deep necessarily, but there's a lot of stories you can learn. You can just go through and you can kind of flesh the world out and your character out a little bit more. Again, it talks a lot about your family and your friends, and loyalty to your friends and family. Again, it also has maybe a little bit of some Red Dead Redemption and some Grand Theft Auto. It's a little bit based off of Rockstar a little bit. It's also, it's based off of some RPGs. And there's also multiple combat stances. They got melee combat. You got some shooting combat. Sometimes you drive in the car and you can fight in the car. And there's some cool stuff to it also. And again, there's a lot of adult, mature themes, but it also shows that we live in a fallen society. Okay, so those are just some different aspects of Cyberpunk. So would I recommend this game? To be honest, it's actually a pretty hard decision. I would say it's a really fun game to play, and it's really enjoyable. But there's also a lot of there's just tremendous amounts of sexual references constantly. And to be honest, I feel like it's just over the top. It's I get it, there's a little bit of some, naughty scenes every once in a while. You'll watch a James Bond movie, there's some some dark aspects, right? Every once in a while there's some naughty stuff. But there's just sexual themes just everywhere in it. And it's really hard for me to really accept that. It's there's billboards, there's constant pictures, people walking around. You go to all sorts of like, nightclubs and bars and special areas, and there's just so much sexual themes in Cyberpunk. I mean, honestly, you can kind of just avoid most of that stuff, and it's not that big of a deal. But there's a lot, right? And it's hard to get away from it. It's everywhere, right? So obviously, the sexual themes is a pretty big red flag in Cyberpunk. I mean, now it is what it is, right? It's the secular people made this. It is what it is at the end of the day. And again, there's a lot of violence, but that's just to be expected. It is what it is. I mean, you have to accept those things, or you just have to reject them. I probably, to be honest, I mean, there is a lot of Christian themes in it, and it's also just a lot of fun. It's a pretty neutral world, and I mean, some of these, my personal belief is that moral gray is that you can choose to find what you want to find out of value from it, right? And it's very subjective and it's very gray. Personally speaking, I think that I think that, if you want to play the game, right? And if you don't want to play it, well, then just don't play it. I think there's plenty of other content out there. You don't really need Cyberpunk. But it's also a great story. It's great storytelling. It's a great RPG. But it's also very, very adult. You definitely need to be an adult. And you need to go in with an expectation that this is a very adult series. So, again, yeah, you definitely need to be an adult, just like with The Witcher, right? It's very adult, but if you, again, it's a very high sensitivity, and I mean, if you're sensitive to this kind of stuff, honestly, there's plenty of other stuff out there. You probably should skip this. Truth be told, it's probably just not for you if you're sensitive to this kind of stuff. Honestly, it pushed my boundaries a little bit too. Like, I'm not against there being like, what do they call it? Like a spicy scene, right? But there's just so many references out there, and there's like, there's drug references, tons of alcohol references, and they have a lot of highly, highly suggestive stuff. And again, it's like the game has like the devil constantly tempting you, like every single possibility and opportunity. So I think there could be a lot of good, but there's also a heck of a lot of evil. And I mean, I think it's a great game. I think it's incredibly fun. It's also it's very adult and very mature. So, I mean, I don't know. Personally speaking, I think it's a great game. I think it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed myself. Yeah, honestly, the main story is not too long. It's like, it doesn't go too long. I think it finally comes to an end. And to be honest, I kind of appreciated that. I like that the story isn't like, again, like, I play some of these JRPG games and it's like 40 something hours long of a cutscene story. Cyberpunk is like maybe like 7-8 hours long. It's not like so long, and honestly, it's really fast and it feels really fast. So maybe the main story is like 15 hours long, but it feels like maybe 6 or 7. It's really fast, it's really comfortable, and it's really smooth, and it kind of just gets the job done. And it's the kind of game where you want to play it more, and you want more content to be in the game, and you want to go out and do everything you can do, because it's just that great of a game. And that's the kind of game I like to play. Not because I have to play it, because I want to. The same thing with The Witcher, right? You want to do all the side stuff because it's awesome. The same thing with Fallout 3. Like, you're gonna go to every single place and do everything in the game because the game is awesome. So it's a little bit of a mix of Red Dead Redemption 2, right? It's a little bit of a mix of like Rockstar, a little bit of a mix of Bethesda. It has some RPG mechanics in it. It's a great game. I really enjoyed it. But you gotta keep your wits about you. Alright, thanks for watching. God is good.